In every corner of the ancient world, there was one moment the sky could not be trusted. A sudden dimming of daylight, a slow swallowing of the sun, and a silence that fell across entire civilizations, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. To people in Mesopotamia, China, Egypt, and the Americas, an eclipse was never just an alignment of celestial bodies. It was a warning, a message written in shadow, a sign that something unseen had shifted in the order of existence. Before we understood orbits, gravity, or cosmic mechanics, humanity looked up and saw something far more unsettling, a sky that could change its mind. Before we go deeper into these forgotten interpretations of eclipses across ancient cultures, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep these long-form history and mystery stories alive. Because once you realize how ancient civilizations experienced the same sky, you never look at daylight the same way again. The sky changes without warning. One moment it is the familiar weight of daylight stretching across fields, rivers, and stone. The next, something begins to erase it. Not quickly, not like a storm rolling in, but with a strange, deliberate patience. The sun, once absolute in its authority, starts to dim as if the world itself is being gently extinguished. Shadows sharpen, colors drain, birds fall silent. And for those who have never seen it before, there is no explanation that feels sufficient for what is happening above them. In scattered moments across deep history, across continents not yet connected by roads or empires, human beings look up and witness the same impossible transformation. The sky, which has always been stable in its rhythm, suddenly becomes unreliable. It is in these moments that fear begins to take shape, not as imagination, but as instinct. Something vast is moving up there, something that does not behave like anything on Earth. Before going deeper into this story of eclipses and how ancient cultures understood them, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, long before written language, long before cities rose or calendars were carved into stone, early humans already lived under a sky that occasionally betrayed them. A solar eclipse does not arrive gently. It interrupts reality. For a few minutes, the normal order of the world collapses. Heat fades. Light becomes unnatural. The horizon looks closer, as if the world is shrinking inward. Even today, with all scientific understanding, the experience still carries an emotional weight that is difficult to fully ignore. In the ancient world, where explanation was limited to story and spirit, that weight became something far more dangerous. In prehistoric landscapes, where survival depended on reading the environment with precision, any sudden disruption was meaningful. The sun was not just light, it was timing, agriculture, warmth, and safety. When it began to vanish in the middle of the day, it was not simply an astronomical event. It was interpreted as a break in the structure of existence itself. Some early communities likely reacted with panic, others with ritual behavior passed down through generations, even if they did not fully understand what they were responding to. Across time, as early civilizations began to form, the memory of these moments did not fade. Instead, it hardened into meaning. In regions that would become known as ancient Mesopotamia, particularly within the cultural sphere of Mesopotamia, the sky was treated as a living text. Every unusual movement of celestial bodies was recorded, interpreted, and woven into systems of divine communication. An eclipse was not random. It was a message, often a warning, sometimes a judgment. Far to the east, In early dynastic traditions of ancient China, the sudden disappearance of the sun was sometimes explained through the imagery of a celestial creature consuming it. The event was not merely observed, it was confronted. Drums, chants, and collective noise-making rituals were used in attempts to drive the darkness away, as if sound itself could restore the balance of the sky. On the other side of the world, among the cultures of Mesoamerica, later civilizations such as the Maya would develop precise astronomical systems that tracked celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. Yet even with advanced knowledge, eclipses retained symbolic power. They were integrated into cosmology, prophecy, and royal legitimacy, reflecting a world where scientific observation and spiritual interpretation were not separate categories, but overlapping ways of understanding reality. But to understand why eclipses became so powerful in human imagination, it is not enough to look at the civilizations that recorded them. It is necessary to return to the emotional core of the experience itself. Imagine standing in an open landscape thousands of years ago. There are no artificial lights, no clock towers, no noise of machinery. The sun governs everything. Then, without warning, it begins to vanish. The air cools. The light shifts to something metallic, unfamiliar. The shadows beneath stones begin to distort. For a brief period, the world feels unstable, as if it has lost its anchor. In such a moment, the human mind searches for cause, not scientific cause, but intentional cause. Something must have done this. Something must want this. And so the earliest interpretations of eclipses were born not from ignorance alone, but from necessity. When survival depends on understanding patterns, even the most terrifying anomaly must be given meaning. What makes eclipses particularly powerful in ancient thought is their paradoxical predictability. Unlike earthquakes or storms, they follow a cycle. Yet that cycle is invisible without careful observation over long periods of time. Early societies saw only the interruption, not the pattern behind it. The result was a phenomenon that felt both structured and chaotic at once, order hidden inside apparent cosmic collapse. Over generations, this duality shaped belief systems. The sky became a domain of both order and warning. The sun and moon were no longer just objects but participants in a cosmic relationship that could, at times, turn hostile. The eclipse became a moment when that relationship revealed its instability. Even today, when modern science can calculate eclipses down to the second, the emotional imprint remains surprisingly intact. There is still a brief instinctive hesitation when daylight begins to fail unexpectedly. That instinct is ancient. It is inherited from countless generations who once had no reason to believe the sun would return. In the unfolding story of human civilization, eclipses sit at a unique intersection. They are predictable yet frightening, natural yet interpreted as supernatural, scientific yet emotionally overwhelming. They have been recorded in clay tablets, carved into temple walls, encoded in calendars, and preserved in oral traditions that survived long after the societies that created them disappeared. And in those early moments of fear and interpretation, something important began to form. Not just mythology, not just astronomy, but the first fragile attempt to connect human experience with the mechanics of the cosmos. A connection that would slowly evolve, through centuries of observation and misunderstanding, into one of humanity's earlier sciences. But before prediction and mathematics entered the story, there was only the darkness. A darkness that arrived in daylight, and for those who lived beneath it, nothing in the sky would ever feel entirely stable again. Long after the first fearful encounters with sudden darkness, humans began to seek patterns in the heavens. The earliest observers were not scholars or priests, but hunters, gatherers, and early farmers, people whose survival depended on knowing when the sun would rise, when the moon would wane, and when the seasons would shift. In the vast open plains of Mesopotamia, clay tablets reveal that as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, scribes were already recording lunar phases and movements of planets with meticulous care. These were not purely ceremonial exercises. They were attempts to make sense of time itself, to structure human life around the invisible rhythms of the cosmos. In the fertile valleys of ancient Egypt, the rising and setting of celestial bodies guided agricultural cycles, irrigation, and religious festivals, showing a profound awareness that the sky dictated earthly survival. By tracking the moon and sun, ancient peoples slowly learned to anticipate the extraordinary moments when one would eclipse the other. Yet the understanding remained incomplete. While patterns could be glimpsed, the causes of these shadowed interludes remained mysterious. In ancient China, astronomers developed some of the earliest predictive models, using complex calendars and observations of lunar anomalies. They noticed that eclipses were cyclical, linked to recurring intervals. But the underlying mechanics, the orbits, the geometry, the interlocking spheres of the heavens remained invisible. Observation alone was enough to begin weaving the first threads of astronomy, though often entangled with superstition and the assumption of divine will. Among the peoples of Mesoamerica, long before the construction of towering pyramids, observers of the sky recorded sequences of eclipses as part of broader calendrical systems. The Maya, centuries later, would inherit and refine this knowledge, producing codices that carefully plotted the movement of the sun, moon, and Venus. Their attention to celestial detail was not abstract. It was a form of control, a way to align human activity with the rhythms of the universe, to reduce the existential shock that a sudden eclipse once brought. Yet even with such sophistication, eclipses retained their power to awe and terrify, demonstrating that knowledge could coexist with fear. The very act of observation shaped culture. In Mesopotamia, scholars discovered that eclipses could presage earthly events, particularly those involving kings and rulers, royal astrologers, entrusted with the careful recording of celestial phenomena, began to correlate eclipses with political upheaval, famines, or wars. The sky, already a source of wonder, became a ledger of potential calamity. These early astronomers were careful, their notes detailed, but their interpretations also reveal the human tendency to see intention behind coincidence. A moon swallowed by the sun was no longer merely a natural event. It became a narrative, a story written across the sky, connecting cosmic order with human fate. Even in regions where writing was still nascent, such as the river valleys of South Asia, communities incorporated lunar and solar observations into ritual and daily life. Patterns of light and shadow inform the timing of festivals, sacrifices, and seasonal celebrations. In each of these early civilizations, from ancient Egypt to Mesopotamia to the pre-Columbian societies of the Americas, a shared realization emerges: the sky is ordered. Yet its anomalies, eclipses, are reminders that even the most reliable patterns can bend unexpectedly, and that human understanding is always a work in progress. Interestingly, what survives in the archaeological record suggests that this fascination with celestial patterns was not limited to elites or scholars. Rock art and petroglyphs from distant regions depict the moon and sun in alignment, sometimes surrounded by unusual markings that may correspond to eclipses or other celestial events. These early attempts to document cosmic phenomena reflect a universal human impulse to make sense of the unpredictable, to capture fleeting darkness in permanent form, and to negotiate fear through observation, even without complex mathematics. The act of watching the heavens was an act of survival, both practical and psychological. Scholars still debate how early communities interpreted the interplay of light and shadow, but the evidence shows a growing sophistication in connecting the sky with daily life. Lunar cycles dictated planting and harvesting. Solar movements informed religious observances. Eclipses, while rare, were woven into these systems as moments of heightened significance, their appearance marking not just astronomical events, but narrative milestones in human history. The more the people observed, the more they began to see these celestial events as comprehensible, even if their meaning remained layered with mystery and divine attribution. Through this steady accumulation of observation, humans developed a tentative mastery over time and expectation. The sky, once a source of arbitrary terror, began to yield a pattern, however incomplete. Each new generation added records, refining calendars, noting anomalies, and gradually reducing the unknown. Eclipses remained extraordinary, but they became predictable in a way that previous generations could never have imagined. And in this slow transformation from raw fear to systematic observation, the foundations of early astronomy, ritual, and cultural interpretation were laid, bridging the gap between human vulnerability and the possibility of understanding the cosmos. There is a moment in human history when observation stops being passive and becomes interpretation. It happens quietly, without a single defining invention or sudden breakthrough. Instead, it emerges through repetition. A sky watched too many times, a pattern noticed too often to ignore, and then, gradually, a shift in meaning. What was once only an event becomes a message. In the world of early civilizations, eclipses occupy this turning point with unusual force. They are rare enough to feel extraordinary, yet regular enough once tracked carefully to suggest structure. That combination is unsettling. It implies not chaos, but intention. An intention, in ancient thought, always points toward will. In the records of Mesopotamia, eclipses were among the most carefully monitored celestial phenomena. Scribes working in temple complexes recorded not only when they occurred, but what happened in the world around them. Over time, patterns were proposed: a king's illness, a military defeat, an unusual famine. These were not random associations in their minds. They were attempts to read coherence into a universe that otherwise offered no explanation for sudden cosmic interruption. The logic was not irrational within its context. If the heavens governed order on earth, then disturbances in the heavens must reflect disturbances in that order. An eclipse, therefore, became more than shadow. It became communication, a warning encoded in celestial geometry. Far to the east, in the evolving astronomical traditions of ancient China, similar interpretations took shape, though expressed through different symbolic systems. The sun was often imagined as a vital force, and its disappearance during an eclipse suggested a disruption in cosmic balance. Court astronomers were responsible for predicting these events, and failure to do so carried political consequences. In some historical accounts, officials were punished for failing to anticipate an eclipse, not because the event itself was dangerous, but because ignorance of it implied disorder in the relationship between heaven and the ruler. In both cases, eclipses became politically charged. They were no longer only natural phenomena, they were tied to legitimacy, authority, and the perceived harmony between human governance and cosmic structure. A correctly predicted eclipse could reinforce a ruler's divine favor. An unexpected one could undermine it. Across the broader ancient world, similar patterns emerge. In ancient Egypt, celestial observation was deeply integrated into religious cosmology. The sun's daily journey across the sky was already interpreted as a sacred narrative of life, death, and renewal. An eclipse, interrupting that journey, did not simply represent darkness, it suggested temporary disruption in a divine cycle that was otherwise expected to remain stable. Although Egyptian records of eclipses are less explicit than those from Mesopotamia, later interpretations suggest they were understood within this broader framework of cosmic order and divine balance. What is striking is not only the interpretation of eclipses, but the consistency of human response across regions that had no contact with one another, whether in Mesopotamian temples, Chinese courts, or early Mesoamerican sky-watching traditions. The same conceptual structure appears again and again. The sky is alive with meaning, and its anomalies are signals that require interpretation. In Mesoamerica, this interpretive framework would later become highly sophisticated. Among the Maya celestial cycles were recorded with extraordinary precision. The Dresden Codex, one of the surviving pre-Columbian manuscripts, contains eclipse tables that track lunar cycles and predict future occurrences. But even within this mathematical precision, eclipses retained symbolic weight. They were embedded in narratives of cosmic struggle, transformation, and renewal. The act of prediction did not remove meaning, it deepened it. This duality, precision and symbolism existing together, is central to understanding ancient eclipse interpretation. Modern thinking often separates science from myth, but in early societies these categories had not yet diverged. Observation did not replace interpretation, it reinforced it. The more accurately eclipses could be tracked, the more powerful their perceived significance became. There is also a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. A solar eclipse is one of the few predictable natural events that directly interrupts human perception of stability. Unlike storms or seasonal changes, it arrives suddenly in the middle of normal daylight. The brain, evolved to trust the reliability of the sun, is forced into immediate reassessment. In ancient environments, without scientific explanation, that reassessment defaulted to meaning-making. Something must have caused this. Something must be behind it. This instinct gave rise to a vast network of early eclipse narratives. Some described celestial beings devouring the sun. Others spoke of battles in the sky, where cosmic forces fought for dominance. In some cultures, sound was used as tool of intervention: drums, chants, and shouting directed at the heavens in an attempt to restore light. These responses were not arbitrary. They reflect a fundamental human response to perceived cosmic instability, action in the face of uncertainty. Over time, these interpretations accumulated into structured belief systems. Eclipses were no longer isolated events, but integrated into broader cosmologies. They became part of calendars, rituals, and political systems. Their unpredictability was tamed not by eliminating fear, but by embedding fear within meaning. And yet, even as interpretation deepened, uncertainty remained. No single explanation fully accounted for why eclipses happened. Even the most advanced ancient astronomers could only describe patterns, not mechanisms. The invisible geometry of sun, moon, and earth remained beyond reach. It is within this tension between what could be observed and what could be explained that ancient eclipse understanding developed, a tension that would eventually drive humanity toward more systematic astronomy. but for now still left room for gods, omens, and cosmic intention. The sky, in this period of history, was no longer simply a backdrop. It had become a language, and eclipses were among its most unsettling words. In the oldest cities the world has ever known, the sky's not separate from daily life. It is part of governance, agriculture, war, and survival. Every decision is made with an awareness that above the human world there exists a second, mirrored system, one that moves with its own logic, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in contradiction. Nowhere is this relationship more visible than in the scribbled traditions of Mesopotamia, where the first systematic records of eclipses begin to appear in a form that feels almost modern in its discipline. Clay tablets preserve sequences of celestial observations stretching across generations. These are not casual notes. They are structured logs, time, position, appearance, outcome, over decades and centuries. These records accumulate into something larger than memory. They become data. Yet within this growing precision, interpretation still dominates understanding. When an eclipse is recorded, it is rarely treated as neutral. It is linked to earthly events, the fate of kings, the outcome of wars, the stability of harvests. A darkened sun is not simply an astronomical alignment. It is a disruption in the relationship between heaven and earth. In this worldview, the king is not only a ruler of people but a mediator between cosmic order and human stability. His legitimacy depends on harmony above as much as below. This is why eclipse prediction becomes politically important. If an astronomer can foresee the moment the sun will vanish, then the crisis can be managed, interpreted, perhaps even ritualistically contained. But if the eclipse arrives without warning, it is a fracture in that system, a moment where the sky speaks without permission. Far to the east, in the courts of ancient China, celestial observation develops under similar pressures but with distinct cultural framing. The concept of the mandate of heaven ties cosmic order directly to political legitimacy. An eclipse, therefore, is not merely an omen, it is a potential statement about the emperor's alignment with the universe itself. Court astronomers are tasked with extraordinary responsibility. Their records must be precise, their predictions accurate. Because failure is not just scientific error, it is political instability written across the sky. Historical accounts suggest that in some periods, officials were punished or removed from office when eclipses were not properly anticipated. This reflects not only belief in celestial influence, but also the fragile integration of astronomy into governance. The sky becomes part of the administrative system, and its irregularities become matters of state. In ancient Egypt, the integration of celestial phenomena into state and religion takes a different form. The sun, central to Egyptian cosmology, is associated with divine cycles of death and rebirth. Its daily journey across the sky is a narrative of renewal, embodied in the movements of solar deities. An eclipse interrupts this narrative in a way that is deeply symbolic, even if not always explicitly documented in surviving records. Later interpretations suggest that such events would have been understood as temporary disruptions in divine rhythm rather than permanent anomalies. Across all these regions, a shared pattern emerges. Eclipses are consistently linked to systems of authority. Whether through kingship, divine mandate, or ritual order, the disappearance of the sun is never politically neutral. It always matters. In Mesoamerica, this relationship becomes even more mathematically sophisticated over time. Among the Maya, detailed astronomical systems allow for remarkably accurate eclipse prediction. The Dresden Codex contains tables that map lunar cycles with precision sufficient to anticipate future eclipses within narrow time windows. Yet even here, prediction does not remove meaning. Instead, it enhances it. The ability to foresee an eclipse does not make it less significant. It makes it more controlled, more integrated into ritual time. This blending of calculation and meaning is essential to understanding ancient eclipse culture. In modern thinking, prediction often reduces mystery. In ancient contexts, prediction often increased significance. If the sky can be read, then it must be speaking. If it speaks, then it must be saying something important. What is preserved in archaeological and textual evidence also reveals something subtler. Eclipses were not isolated curiosities. They were woven into broader systems of seasonal planning, agricultural cycles, and ritual calendars. The same societies that recorded eclipses also tracked planetary movements, solstices, and lunar phases with remarkable consistency. This suggests that eclipse interpretation was part of a larger effort to synchronize human life with celestial rhythm. At the same time, the emotional impact of an eclipse remains visible in how it is described. Even in highly structured records, there is often an implicit sense of disruption. The sun disappears, is swallowed, or is obscured, language that reflects perception rather than abstract geometry. The experience is still grounded in human observation, not theoretical explanation. Scholars continue to debate how early interpretations evolved from mythic framing toward more predictive models. What survives in the record suggests a gradual layering rather than a clear transition. Myth does not disappear when prediction improves. Instead, both systems coexist. One describes how the sky behaves, the other explains why it behaves that way. In many cases, they are not seen as contradictory. The result is a world in which eclipses occupy multiple layers of meaning, simultaneously astronomical events, divine messages, political signals, and psychological shocks. Each layer reinforces the others, creating a dense network of interpretation that spans cultures and centuries. And beneath all of it remains the same simple experience: daylight fading into unnatural darkness, and the brief, unsettling realization that something in the sky has changed without warning. In that moment, whether in Mesopotamian cities, Chinese courts, Egyptian temples, or Mesoamerican observatories, the world feels briefly unanchored, and human beings, across all these civilizations, respond in the only way they know how. They try to read the sky. The sudden darkness of an eclipse did not simply inspire observation, it demanded action. Across the ancient world, communities developed elaborate rituals to confront, interpret, and survive the shadowed sun and moon. These ceremonies were rooted in the belief that human intervention could influence cosmic outcomes, that sound, movement, and offerings might restore balance to a world suddenly deprived of light. In ancient China, eclipses were imagined as celestial dragons swallowing the sun. When the sky darkened, drums thundered and gongs rang across palace courtyards. Groups of people would bang on bronze vessels or beat hollow logs, creating cacophonous noise intended to frighten the dragon and force the sun's return. These rituals were not performative alone, they were socially and politically charged. Entire communities participated, reaffirming cohesion and shared understanding in the face of an event beyond mortal control. The noise served both a symbolic and practical purpose. It allowed people to act against uncertainty, channeling fear into a collective experience. In Mesopotamia, eclipse rituals often intersected with royal politics. Priests and astrologers were responsible for interpreting the darkening sky and advising the king on protective measures. Some texts suggest that temporary stand-ins were appointed to act on behalf of the monarch during dangerous celestial events, a practice designed to shield the actual ruler from perceived divine wrath. Sacrifices, prayers, and public processions accompanied these precautions, embedding the eclipse within both religious and social frameworks. The act of ritual became a tool for navigating the anxieties of an unpredictable universe, a bridge between celestial portent and human agency. Among the peoples of Mesoamerica, ritual responses were equally complex but often intertwined with agricultural and ceremonial cycles. The Maya and other pre-Columbian societies integrated eclipses into broader cosmological narratives. Offerings were made, sometimes involving intricate symbolic objects or elaborate temple ceremonies, aimed at ensuring cosmic favor and continuity. The eclipse was a reminder of the delicate balance between life, death, and renewal, emphasizing the interdependence of human action and cosmic order. Even in societies without monumental architecture or written language, echoes of ritualized response survive in rock art and oral traditions. Petroglyphs depicting aligned moons and suns, often accompanied by anthropomorphic figures, hint at ceremonies meant to acknowledge or influence celestial events. While the precise meaning of these images remains debated, their very existence suggests that humans have long sought ways to exert some control over the terrifying unpredictability of the sky. The content of these rituals varied widely, reflecting both the local cosmology and the perceived threat of the eclipse. Some sought to appease angry deities, others aimed to force the sun's return through symbolic combat or magical action. Drums, fire, chanting, and sacrifice became universal languages of response, translating fear into structured human behavior. Scholars still debate the efficacy of these rituals from a historical perspective, but their psychological function is clear. They allowed communities to respond collectively, to transform passivity into purposeful engagement with a phenomenon beyond comprehension. Interestingly, many rituals also reinforced social hierarchies and political authority. Those who could interpret eclipses, priests, shamans, astronomers acquired elevated status, as their knowledge connected human communities with the divine rhythms of the cosmos. The act of performing or directing rituals became a demonstration of control over both natural and social order. In Mesopotamia, predictive authority and ritual expertise were tightly linked, demonstrating how the eclipse operated as both a celestial event and a mechanism of power. Similarly, in Mesoamerica, priests who could forecast eclipses or direct ceremonies wielded considerable influence over civic and religious life, their actions reinforcing both cosmological and earthly hierarchies. The evidence also shows that not all rituals were uniform or continuous. Some were improvised, spontaneous responses to unexpected darkness, reflecting the raw instinctive fear that accompanies the interruption of daylight. Others were meticulously planned, timed according to calendars and celestial tables, integrating knowledge of past eclipses into structured ceremony. What remains consistent is the human impulse when the sun or moon is swallowed. People act. In every case, ritual transforms the eclipse from a passive event into a socially meaningful moment. It becomes a stage upon which cosmic and human orders intersect, where fear, authority, and belief converge in synchronized performance. This interplay of observation and action highlights the complexity of early human engagement with the sky, not merely watching, but participating. Across regions and millennia, these rituals left traces that persist in subtle ways: the alignment of temples, the placement of ceremonial sites, the imagery carved into stone. They reflect a deep understanding that eclipses are not just optical phenomena, but events charged with cultural, spiritual, and psychological significance. The act of ritualizing the eclipse demonstrates humanity's earliest attempts to mediate uncertainty, to assert influence over the incomprehensible, and to weave terrifying celestial moments into the fabric of daily life. In confronting the darkness of an eclipse, ancient peoples did more than survive. They created systems of meaning that bridged the human and the cosmic, leaving a legacy that still resonates in our fascination with these fleeting shadows across the sky. As rituals and interpretations developed, eclipses began to enter the broader chronicles of history. They were no longer mere disruptions in the sky. They became markers of time, signposts within narratives of war, political change, and social upheaval. In Mesopotamia, for example, clay tablets and later cuneiform chronicles preserve records of eclipses coinciding with significant events: the death of a king, the fall of a city, or the outbreak of conflict. The phenomenon was linked, retrospectively and sometimes contemporaneously, to earthly outcomes, creating a subtle interweaving of celestial and human history. Scholars still debate whether these correlations are coincidental or reflect deliberate narrative framing, but their persistence suggests that eclipses were regarded as historically consequential. In ancient China, the meticulous recording of eclipses became a tool for statecraft. Court astronomers were charged not only with observation but with situating eclipses within a moral and political framework. A missed prediction could be interpreted as a breach of the emperor's harmony with the heavens, a signal that his mandate of heaven was in jeopardy. Historical annals often highlight eclipses as omens preceding rebellions, natural disasters, or dynastic transitions, reinforcing the perception that the cosmos directly influenced the fate of rulers and their realms. In ancient Egypt, the integration of eclipses into the recording of historical events is less explicit, partly because of the sun's centrality to daily religious and cosmological narratives. However, astronomical observations aligned with temple inscriptions, monumental architecture, and festival timing suggest that eclipses were noted, interpreted, and contextualized within broader historical cycles. Egyptian priests and scribes may have seen eclipses as indicators of disruption or transition, a reflection of celestial power manifesting within earthly history. Across the Atlantic, in the civilizations of Mesoamerica, eclipse records similarly intersected with historical events, especially those involving rulers or wars. Codices, stelae, and ceremonial inscriptions indicate that eclipses were associated with significant shifts in political or ritual authority. While precise chronological correlation remains challenging, the emphasis on eclipses in historical documents points to their role as symbolic markers of turning points within society. They functioned as temporal anchors, allowing communities to link cosmic phenomena with the human story, embedding each shadowed sun or moon into the narrative of civilization. The use of eclipses as historical signposts demonstrates a human impulse to find meaning in temporal patterns. They are one of the few natural phenomena that can be precisely dated, yet their rarity makes them dramatic markers. When an eclipse coincides with a battle, the crowning of a king, or a devastating flood, the event is recorded in memory and text, reinforcing its perceived significance. What survives in the record suggests that civilizations did not merely observe eclipses, they integrated them into their understanding of causality, fate, and human agency. Interestingly, in some instances, eclipses appear to have been deliberately invoked in political storytelling. Chronicles would emphasize an eclipse occurring before a ruler's death or the fall of a city, framing the event as preordained or cosmically sanctioned. This blurs the line between observation and narrative construction, revealing the dual function of eclipses as both astronomical events and instruments of interpretation. The same event could validate a king, delegitimize a rival, or provide a moral lesson, depending on how it was recorded and remembered. While modern historians approach these correlations cautiously, the patterns are striking. Eclipses often punctuate historical timelines in a way that emphasizes their symbolic weight. They serve as anchors in oral traditions and written chronicles alike, making them one of the few celestial phenomena to leave a durable imprint on both human memory and documentation. In societies where literacy was limited and survival demanded acute awareness of environmental cues, the eclipse's sudden intrusion into daylight became an unforgettable event, worthy of chronicling for generations. Even as predictive techniques began to develop, the dramatic, sometimes terrifying impact of an eclipse ensured that it remained a historical marker. Unlike seasonal changes or planetary alignments, eclipses disrupt perception in real time, creating an experience that is both vivid and unusual. The psychological imprint reinforces the historical significance. An eclipse is remembered not only because it can be dated, but because it is extraordinary in its immediate effect on human consciousness. This dual character, predictable yet disruptive, makes eclipses uniquely suited to mark turning points in history. By situating eclipses within narratives of kings, battles, and social events, ancient societies transformed a rare astronomical phenomenon into a tool for storytelling, moral instruction, and temporal orientation. Across Mesopotamia, China, Egypt, and Mesoamerica, eclipses became woven into the fabric of history itself, leaving traces that modern scholars continue to study in an effort to understand both the cosmos and the civilizations that sought to interpret it. For thousands of years, eclipses remained suspended between fear and meaning, between ritual response and historical interpretation. But slowly, in scattered centers of learning, something new begins to emerge, not a rejection of older beliefs, but a different way of engaging with the sky, a shift from interpretation toward prediction, from meaning toward mechanism. In the scholarly traditions of Mesopotamia, this shift is first visible in the careful mathematical structuring of celestial records. Temple astronomers, often working over generations, begin to notice that certain patterns repeat with striking regularity. Lunar cycles, planetary motions, and eclipse intervals start to form a kind of hidden architecture in the sky. One of the most important realizations comes from long-term observation. Eclipses are not random. They follow cycles, even if those cycles are difficult to fully grasp without continuous record keeping. This insight does not immediately remove their symbolic meaning. Instead, it adds another layer. The sky is still a place of divine communication, but it is also beginning to reveal a structure that can be studied. The emergence of eclipse prediction is not a sudden breakthrough, but a gradual accumulation of careful attention, tables of numbers, lists of dates, and comparisons across generations of scribes. A key development arises from what later scholars recognize as early forms of periodicity tracking. By comparing past eclipses, Babylonian astronomers identify recurring intervals that suggest a hidden rhythm governing the alignment of sun, moon, and earth. Though they do not yet understand orbital mechanics in a modern sense, they begin to approximate predictive capability. An eclipse can be anticipated, even if the reason behind it remains partially concealed. In ancient China, Similar progress unfolds within a different intellectual framework. Court astronomers compile extensive records of celestial phenomena, including eclipses, comets, and planetary movements. These records are not merely scientific documents, they are administrative tools. Prediction becomes a matter of state necessity. The ability to forecast an eclipse demonstrates not only intellectual skill, but also alignment with cosmic order. Over time, increasingly sophisticated calendrical systems emerge, capable of anticipating eclipses with growing accuracy. Yet even in this context of precision, explanation remains incomplete. The sky is measurable but not fully understood. The geometry of celestial motion is observed, but its physical causes are not yet conceptualized. The result is a hybrid worldview in which calculation and cosmology coexist. The eclipse can be predicted mathematically while still being interpreted as a meaningful event within the moral structure of the universe. In parallel, early observational traditions in other parts of the world contribute indirectly to this growing body of knowledge. In ancient Egypt, careful tracking of lunar and solar cycles supports agricultural and religious planning, reinforcing the importance of celestial regularity. While explicit predictive eclipse models are less clearly documented, the broader emphasis on astronomical precision contributes to a shared intellectual environment in which the sky is increasingly seen as orderly and structured. What is particularly significant in this period is the transformation of time itself. With the accumulation of astronomical records, time becomes something that can be measured, divided, and projected forward. An eclipse is no longer only an unexpected interruption. It is becoming an event that can be located in advance, marked on a calendar, and anticipated by those who understand the underlying patterns. This does not diminish its emotional impact. Even when expected, an eclipse still produces a visible disruption in the natural world. Light fades, temperature drops, and the landscape transforms in ways that remain strikingly unfamiliar. What changes is not the experience, but the interpretation of surprise. The shock of the unknown gives way, slowly, to the anticipation of a known phenomenon. In Mesoamerica, this duality becomes particularly evident in later astronomical traditions. The Maya, building upon long observational lineages, develop eclipse tables capable of predicting lunar and solar alignments with remarkable precision. Yet these predictions do not strip eclipses of meaning. Instead, they integrate them more deeply into ritual cycles and cosmological narratives. Knowledge does not replace mythology, it refines it. The broader consequence of these developments is subtle but profound. For the first time in human history, part of the sky becomes predictable in a systematic way. This marks an intellectual turning point, the beginning of astronomy, as something distinct from pure divination. However, the boundary remains fluid. Prediction is still embedded in systems of belief, and numerical patterns are still interpreted through moral and symbolic frameworks. What emerges is a layered understanding of the cosmos. At one level, eclipses are events of geometry and alignment. At another, they remain messages, omens, or reflections of cosmic order. These layers do not cancel each other out. Instead, they coexist, shaping a worldview in which observation and meaning are inseparable. The slow development of predictive astronomy represents one of the earliest examples of humanity learning to see order beneath apparent chaos. Yet even as this order is uncovered, the emotional and cultural weight of eclipses persists. The sky becomes more understandable, but not less powerful. And in that balance between knowledge and mystery, ancient astronomy takes its first sustained steps towards science. even as calculation and prediction begin to take shape in scattered centers of ancient learning. The older world of meaning does not disappear. It deepens, spreads, and transforms into stories that travel further than any tablet or calendar. Eclipses, now partially understood in their timing, remain fully alive in imagination. In the cultural landscapes of Mesopotamia, celestial events are still woven into mythic frameworks that explain not just what happens in the sky, but why it happens at all. The sun and moon are not distant objects but active participants in a structured cosmos. When darkness falls during an eclipse, it is not a mechanical alignment alone, it is interpreted as disruption in a living order. Stories emerge that describe celestial struggles, temporary victories of darkness, and the eventual restoration of balance. These narratives are not fixed texts but evolving traditions. They adapt as observation improves, yet they retain their emotional core. Even scribes who understand periodicity do not fully abandon symbolic interpretation. The sky remains a space where knowledge and narrative overlap, where measurement does not erase meaning but exists alongside it. In ancient China, eclipse myths take on vivid and enduring forms. One of the most persistent images is that of a celestial creature consuming the sun or moon. This imagery reflects an attempt to translate an abstract astronomical event into something visually and emotionally comprehensible. A dragon devouring light is not meant as literal explanation, but as symbolic language for an experience that disrupts ordinary perception. These stories are reinforced by ritual response. When drums and gongs echo during an eclipse, the myth and the action become inseparable. The sound is not only resistance, it is reenactment of cosmic struggle. Myth gives structure to fear, and ritual gives form to myth. Across Mesoamerica, eclipse narratives are deeply integrated into cosmological cycles of destruction and renewal. The sky is understood as a dynamic space where creation and dissolution are ongoing processes. In this context, an eclipse is not purely an interruption, but a moment of transition, a visible sign that cosmic balance is being renegotiated. Stories embedded in later traditions describe celestial bodies engaged in complex relationships of pursuit, concealment, and transformation. What is striking across these regions is the shared narrative impulse. Despite vast geographical and cultural separation, eclipses consistently generate stories of consumption, conflict, or transformation. The sun is swallowed, covered, or temporarily removed. Light is threatened and then restored. This pattern suggests something fundamental in human cognition when faced with sudden, global-scale visual change. The mind constructs narrative forms that mirror lived experience of struggle and resolution. In ancient Egypt, mythic interpretation is often tied to cyclical renewal. The sun's journey through the sky is already embedded in stories of passage through darkness and rebirth. An eclipse fits into this framework as an intensified moment of disruption, a temporary distortion of a cycle that is otherwise stable, while direct eclipse myths are less explicitly preserved. The symbolic structure of Egyptian cosmology makes it clear that celestial interruptions would be interpreted within a broader narrative of cosmic order and restoration. As these myths evolve, they begin to influence how eclipses are remembered. Historical accounts are shaped not only by what was observed but by the stories available to explain it. An eclipse that coincides with a battle may be remembered not as coincidence, but as confirmation of celestial involvement. Narrative and memory reinforce each other, creating a layered record where fact and interpretation are inseparable. Yet even within mythological frameworks, a subtle tension persists. The more carefully eclipses are observed, the more predictable they become, and the more predictable they become, the more difficult it is to treat them purely as unpredictable acts of divine will. This tension does not resolve, it accumulates. Myth does not vanish in the presence of knowledge. Instead, it adjusts, shifting emphasis from randomness to meaning within structure. In this way, eclipses occupy a unique position in ancient thought. They are both scientifically tractable and symbolically rich. They can be predicted, but still feel extraordinary. They can be explained, but still demand interpretation. This duality allows them to persist across intellectual transitions that might otherwise have separated myth from observation. What survives in the cultural record is not a replacement of myth by science, but a long coexistence. Stories of celestial beings, cosmic struggles, and transformative darkness continue to exist alongside increasingly precise astronomical records. The eclipse becomes a shared point between two ways of understanding reality, one rooted in narrative meaning, the other in patterned observation. And between those two ways of seeing the sky, ancient civilizations continue to live under the same fleeting darkness, still searching for understanding in the moment when the sun disappears. Across continents and cultures, eclipses reveal a fascinating diversity in human interpretation. While some societies see them as threats, others interpret them as opportunities for renewal, and still others imbue them with a dual character, both ominous and transformative. This divergence illustrates the complex ways in which humanity responds to sudden disruption in the sky, shaping beliefs and rituals that are culturally distinct yet thematically resonant. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, eclipses are often framed as harbingers of danger. The sudden disappearance of the sun or moon is associated with political instability, illness, or famine. Astronomers and priests, tasked with interpreting these events, often advise rulers on protective actions, sometimes including sacrifices or symbolic stand-ins for the monarch. Fear is central to this worldview, and eclipses serve as reminders of human vulnerability under the vast and inscrutable sky. Far to the east, in ancient China, eclipses occupy a more morally nuanced position. While they can indicate imbalance or potential disorder, the framework of the mandate of heaven transforms them into guidance. The appearance of an eclipse may warn the emperor of ethical lapses or the need to correct governance, suggesting that human action can restore harmony. Here, eclipses are not solely sources of terror, they are also opportunities for reflection, adjustment, and social realignment. Light, when it returns, symbolizes restored order as much as survival itself. Among the peoples of Mesoamerica, eclipses are often integrated into long cycles of life, death, and renewal. The Maya view them not only as dangerous but also as essential moments in cosmological narratives. A solar eclipse, for example, may represent a temporary victory of night over day, a reversal that is both feared and expected within larger cyclical processes. Rituals accompanying the event reinforce human participation in these cosmic patterns, emphasizing balance and continuity rather than mere avoidance of disaster. Even within single cultural regions, interpretations vary. Different city-states, temple complexes, or social strata may attach distinct significance to the same astronomical phenomenon. In Mesopotamia, the same eclipse could be read as a political omen in one city, while interpreted as a general portent of disorder in another. Similarly, in Mesoamerica, priestly elites might emphasize the eclipse's cosmological implications, while common farmers focus on its timing for agricultural cycles. This multiplicity underscores the fact that eclipses are simultaneously natural events, cultural symbols, and social instruments. A striking commonality emerges despite these differences. The eclipse is consistently framed as a moment of heightened meaning. It is rare, visually dramatic, and temporally acute, making it a powerful canvas for narrative, ritual, and moral reflection, whether seen as destructive, corrective, or transitional. The event provokes human attention and response at multiple levels: psychological, social, and cosmological. Symbols and rituals further reinforce these cultural divergences. In Mesopotamia, eclipses may be associated with the swallowing of celestial bodies by cosmic demons. In China, they may signal dragon-like creatures consuming the sun. In Mesoamerica, eclipses are integrated into layered mythic accounts of solar and lunar cycles. Each interpretation aligns with the broader symbolic universe of the culture, reflecting shared values, fears, and cosmological principles. No single explanation can fully encompass these variations, but the persistence of thematic threads, disruption, danger, renewal points to a universal human impulse to ascribe meaning to sudden celestial phenomena. These cultural divergences also reveal the adaptability of human imagination. Knowledge of patterns and predictive cycles did not eliminate fear or myth. Rather, it provided a framework within which interpretation could be refined, localized, and ritualized. Even the same eclipse could produce multiple, simultaneous layers of meaning, depending on who witnessed it, where, and within which cultural lens. Observation and imagination are intertwined, each amplifying the other. The result is a tapestry of understanding in which eclipses are simultaneously universal and particular. They serve as lenses through which societies examine cosmic order, moral responsibility, political legitimacy, and human agency. The sky, once a silent stage, becomes an active participant in the narrative of civilization, and its anomalies, the eclipses, function as both mirror and message. In short, eclipses are not simply phenomena to be feared or understood. They are cultural instruments shaping identity, reinforcing hierarchy, and providing moments of collective reflection. Their interpretations diverge widely, yet each reinforces a central truth humans cannot witness: the sudden absence of light without searching for significance. Across time and space, the shadowed sun and moon remain potent symbols of the fragile, interwoven relationship between humanity and the cosmos. As knowledge and ritual intertwine, eclipses become instruments of authority. The capacity to anticipate, interpret, and respond to a solar or lunar disappearance elevates individuals and institutions to positions of power. Across civilizations, the act of mastering the sky, whether through calculation, ritual, or storytelling, translates directly into political and social influence. In Mesopotamia, the court astronomer is more than a scholar. He is an intermediary between heaven and king. By accurately predicting an eclipse, he demonstrates command over celestial rhythms and reinforces the ruler's connection to cosmic order. Conversely, failure can delegitimize authority, creating political tension or even personal peril. The eclipse, therefore, becomes a tool of governance, not merely a natural event. Prediction consolidates social hierarchies, allowing those with knowledge of the sky to guide, advise, and, in subtle ways, control the masses' perception of the world. Similarly, in ancient China, the mandate of heaven links celestial observation directly to the moral authority of the emperor. Court astronomers tasked with forecasting eclipses operate within a delicate political balance. Accurate predictions affirm the ruler's virtue and legitimacy. Miscalculations may be interpreted as signs of cosmic disfavor. In this context, astronomical skill is inseparable from political power. The eclipse becomes both a test and a reinforcement of governance. A vivid demonstration that the heavens watch over human conduct and reward or punish accordingly. In Mesoamerica, priests and ritual specialists similarly wield authority through eclipse knowledge. The ability to predict and ritualize eclipses reinforces their spiritual and social status, embedding their influence into civic and religious life. When a predicted eclipse occurs, it validates the priesthood's expertise and maintains confidence in established cosmologies. Here, the eclipse functions as both a spectacle and a mechanism for legitimizing institutional control. Even in smaller or less centralized societies, mastery of eclipses confers symbolic capital, rock art, oral traditions, and minor ritual centers demonstrate that local leaders or shamans could enhance their status by interpreting or responding to eclipses effectively. The ability to translate fear into structured action strengthens communal cohesion, while simultaneously elevating those who possess specialized knowledge. What emerges from these patterns is a consistent principle. Knowledge of eclipses converts into tangible social power. Understanding the mechanics or cycles of celestial bodies, performing rituals correctly, or producing authoritative interpretations allows individuals to exert influence beyond their immediate physical capacity. The event itself, the sudden dimming of the sun or moon, becomes a stage upon which authority is both tested and demonstrated. Interestingly, this interplay between astronomical knowledge and social hierarchy is not strictly limited to elite societies. Even among common communities, participation in eclipse rituals reinforces collective identity and shared understanding. Drums, chants, and public processions serve dual purposes. They respond to the cosmic event and structure social cohesion. Through ritual, knowledge of the sky is democratized in practice. Yet the interpretive authority remains concentrated in the hands of those trained or designated to lead. Predictive knowledge further enhances the symbolic weight of eclipses. If the timing of a solar or lunar event can be forecasted, it creates an impression of human alignment with cosmic order. Those capable of such foresight appear connected to forces far greater than themselves. Prediction becomes not merely a scientific exercise, but a demonstration of control over the otherwise uncontrollable, reinforcing both spiritual and temporal power structures. In a sense, eclipses serve as instruments of governance, both overt and subtle. They validate rulers, empower priestly or scholarly classes, and shape communal behavior. The event's extraordinary visual impact ensures that it is memorable, dramatic, and emotionally charged, amplifying its political and social function. In these moments, darkness becomes authority made visible, a fleeting but powerful confirmation that knowledge, ritual, and human hierarchy are intertwined under the vast expanse of the sky. Across Mesopotamia, China, and Mesoamerica, and in countless smaller societies in between, eclipses are transformed from natural anomalies into instruments of human influence. Their significance extends far beyond observation or ritual. They are mechanisms through which humans negotiate power, structure society, and align human action with the rhythms of the cosmos. The shadow of the sun or moon, ephemeral as it may be, casts a long reach across both culture and history. Even as prediction advanced and eclipses became partially understood, ancient records continue to show something curious: the repeated association between celestial darkness and earthly disruption. Across many cultures, eclipses appear alongside accounts of conflict, famine, sudden leadership changes, or environmental stress. Whether these connections reflect genuine causation, selective memory, or narrative framing remains one of the most debated questions in historical interpretation. In the archives of Mesopotamia, eclipse records are often preserved alongside administrative and political documents. A darkened sun might be noted in the same breath as a king's illness or a military setback. For the scribes, this proximity was meaningful. It suggested a relationship between celestial imbalance and terrestrial instability. Yet modern analysis raises caution. These correlations may reflect hindsight interpretation, where significant events are more likely to be recorded alongside dramatic celestial phenomena simply because both were memorable. In ancient China, historical chronicles also link eclipses to periods of unrest or transformation. A dynasty's decline, a rebellion, or a natural disaster may be recorded in close temporal proximity to an eclipse. The interpretive framework of the mandate of heaven reinforces this association, encouraging the view that celestial anomalies reflect moral or political disorder. However, scholars note that the careful documentation of eclipses in imperial records may also amplify their perceived connection to major events, creating patterns that are as much narrative as they are empirical. In Mesoamerica, similar patterns appear in codices and monumental inscriptions. Eclipses are sometimes recorded near accounts of warfare, leadership transitions, or ritual upheavals. Yet the chronological precision of these associations is often difficult to verify with certainty. What remains clear is that eclipses were considered moments of heightened significance, making them natural anchors for historical memory, regardless of whether they directly influence the events described. This raises a deeper question about how humans construct meaning from rare and dramatic phenomena. An eclipse is infrequent, visually striking, and universally experienced within a given region. When such an event coincides with a major social or environmental disruption, it becomes psychologically compelling to link the two. Over time, these associations can solidify into tradition, reinforcing the perception that eclipses are omens of tangible consequence. Modern scholarship approaches these connections with caution. While some correlations may reflect genuine coincidence, others are likely shaped by selective recording. Events that align with eclipses are more likely to be remembered and preserved, while those that do not may fade from the historical record. This creates an inherent bias in the sources, one that can exaggerate the perceived relationship between celestial and terrestrial events. At the same time, it would be a mistake to dismiss these associations entirely as mere coincidence without cultural context. For ancient observers, the sky was not separate from earthly life. It was part of a unified system in which all events were potentially interconnected. Within this worldview, the concurrence of an eclipse and a political or environmental crisis was not random. It was meaningful, even if the precise mechanism of that meaning was not fully understood. What survives in the historical record is therefore a layered reality. On one level, eclipses are predictable astronomical events governed by celestial mechanics. On another, they are interpreted as signs embedded within broader narratives of human experience. The intersection of these layers produces the appearance of correlation between eclipses and historical disruption, even when causation cannot be demonstrated. This ambiguity is part of what made eclipses so powerful in ancient societies. Their rarity ensured attention, their dramatic appearance ensured memory, and their interpretive flexibility ensured meaning. Whether or not they coincided with actual disasters, they became natural focal points for explaining uncertainty in a world where large-scale events often lacked clear causation. Even today, echoes of this pattern persist in cultural memory. Eclipses remain moments of public fascination, often surrounded by symbolic language, media narratives, and renewed interest in historical parallels. While modern science separates celestial mechanics from earthly events, the human impulse to seek connection between the two has not entirely disappeared. In ancient times, however, no such separation existed. The sky and the earth were part of a continuous system of meaning, and eclipses, because of their rarity and intensity, naturally became central markers within that system. Whether they caused events or merely accompanied them, they were consistently remembered as moments when the ordinary flow of time seemed to pause, and something larger appeared to be unfolding above the world. Long after eclipses had been recorded in clay, carved into stone, and embedded in myth, they began to leave a different kind of trace, one not of calculation or chronicle, but of image. Across ancient worlds, human beings translated the experience of sudden darkness into visual language, shaping symbols that attempted to capture what could never be held still, the moment when light disappears in the middle of the day. In the artistic traditions of Mesopotamia, celestial imagery often appears as structured geometric arrangements, discs, crescents, and layered symbols representing the sun and moon in ordered relation. While not always explicit depictions of eclipses, these compositions reflect a deep interest in the movement and interaction of celestial bodies. When eclipses were represented, they were often encoded within broader cosmological scenes, where divine figures and celestial mechanisms overlap. The sky is not shown as empty space, but as a system filled with meaning, where even temporary darkness has a place within divine architecture. In the visual culture of ancient China, eclipses are sometimes symbolized through dynamic representations of celestial conflict. Dragons, circular forms, and symbolic patterns appear in later artistic traditions, reflecting the belief that a living force interacts with the sun and moon. These images are not literal depictions of astronomical events, but narrative translations of experience. The disappearance of light becomes something active, something that can be imagined as movement, struggle, or consumption. Temples, ritual objects, and later scroll paintings preserve this symbolic vocabulary, embedding eclipses into a broader aesthetic of cosmic balance and transformation. In Mesoamerica, eclipse-related imagery becomes part of a highly developed visual and calendrical system. Carvings, codices, and architectural alignments reflect a worldview in which celestial cycles are inseparable from artistic expression. The sun, moon, and Venus are not only tracked mathematically but also rendered symbolically, often in ways that emphasize cyclical motion, duality, and renewal. Eclipses, when represented, are integrated into this system of layered meaning, appearing as moments of transition within an ongoing cosmic cycle rather than isolated anomalies. What is particularly striking across these regions is the consistency of symbolic themes. Despite cultural and geographic separation, eclipses are repeatedly associated with imagery of interruption, transformation, and interaction between opposing forces. Light and darkness are not static opposites, but dynamic participants in a larger process. This suggests that visual interpretation of eclipses arises from shared perceptual experience. The sudden reversal of daylight demands a symbolic response that can contain its emotional and cognitive impact. In addition to formal artistic traditions, more informal or archaeological evidence suggests that eclipses may have been recorded in simpler, more immediate forms. Petroglyphs and rock engravings from various regions depict concentric circles, partial coverings, or unusual celestial arrangements that some researchers interpret as attempts to capture extraordinary sky events. While the precise meaning of these images remains uncertain, their existence indicates that humans consistently sought to externalize and preserve the memory of celestial disruption. These visual representations serve multiple purposes. They function as memory aids, ritual objects, cosmological diagrams, and symbolic narratives. In societies where written language was limited or restricted to elites, images provided a more accessible means of preserving knowledge about the sky. Even where writing existed, imagery remained essential, reinforcing and sometimes expanding upon textual descriptions. Over time, eclipse imagery becomes embedded not only in religious or scientific contexts, but also in architectural design. Temples and ceremonial structures in Mesoamerica, for example, are often aligned with celestial events, reflecting an architectural dialogue with the sky. The movement of light and shadow across stone surfaces during solstices and potentially eclipses transforms built space into a medium for astronomical experience. In such settings, architecture itself becomes a participant in celestial cycles. In ancient Egypt, solar symbolism dominates artistic expression, with the sun often depicted as a central, life-giving force within complex religious iconography. While direct representations of eclipses are less explicit, the visual language of obstruction and renewal can be seen in broader mythological motifs. The sun's temporary concealment is absorbed into a wider aesthetic of cyclical transformation, where disappearance is always followed by return. Across all these traditions, a key transformation occurs. The eclipse moves from being only an event experienced in time to being an image preserved beyond time. It becomes something that can be shown, repeated, and interpreted long after the sky has returned to normal. This shift is subtle, but profound. It allows eclipses to persist in cultural memory even when no one alive has witnessed the original moment. In this way, art becomes a bridge between experience and understanding. It holds the instability of the sky in fixed form, allowing future generations to engage with what earlier observers could only endure. The darkness of an eclipse, once fleeting and terrifying, becomes part of a lasting visual language that continues to shape how humanity imagines the relationship between earth and sky. By the time written records become more systematic and long-distance knowledge begins to accumulate across generations, eclipses are no longer only interpreted through myth, ritual, or artistic symbolism. They enter a new phase of understanding, shaped by increasingly precise observation and the slow emergence of scientific reasoning. Yet this transition is not abrupt. It unfolds unevenly, across centuries, and within cultures where older cosmologies still remain deeply embedded in how the sky is perceived. In the scholarly traditions that grew out of Mesopotamia, later astronomers refine earlier predictive methods into more structured models. The repeated recording of celestial cycles gradually reveals that eclipses are not isolated anomalies but part of a broader, interconnected system of lunar motion. This realization does not immediately remove symbolic interpretation, but it begins to shift emphasis. The sky is increasingly seen as governed by consistent patterns that can be described, tabulated and anticipated with growing reliability. A similar transformation takes shape in ancient China, where imperial astronomy continues to develop through carefully maintained observational records. Over time, the ability to predict eclipses improves significantly. reflecting both mathematical refinement and accumulated empirical data. Court astronomers become not only interpreters of celestial meaning, but also technicians of timekeeping, responsible for aligning the calendar with observed reality. Yet even in this more structured framework, the symbolic dimension of eclipses does not disappear. Prediction and meaning remain intertwined, with celestial events still reflecting moral and political harmony within the state. In Mesoamerica, particularly among later Maya intellectual traditions, astronomical precision reaches remarkable levels. Eclipse tables, lunar cycle calculations, and long-count calendrical systems demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of periodicity. These systems allow for relatively accurate anticipation of eclipses, embedded within broader cosmological frameworks that integrate time, ritual, and cosmic balance. Here, scientific observation and mythological structure coexist not as opposing systems, but as complementary ways of organizing reality. What begins to emerge across these regions is a gradual redefinition of what it means to understand the sky. Instead of asking only what an eclipse means, observers begin to ask when it will occur and how it can be predicted. This shift marks an important cognitive development, the separation, however incomplete, of explanation from interpretation. The eclipse becomes something that can be modeled rather than only interpreted. Still, the transition remains incomplete for a long time. Even highly accurate predictive systems do not eliminate older frameworks of meaning. In many cases, precise astronomical knowledge actually enhances the significance of eclipses, making them feel more intentional rather than less. If an event can be predicted, it may appear even more structured within a larger cosmic order, reinforcing the idea that the universe operates according to intelligible principles, whether mechanical, moral, or divine. Across all regions, this period reflects a coexistence of two modes of thought. One seeks regularity, measurement, and predictive power. The other seeks meaning, symbolism, and moral alignment. The eclipse exists at the intersection of these modes, serving as both a test case for early scientific reasoning and a persistent source of cultural interpretation. Over time, however, the accumulation of predictive success begins to change perception itself. When eclipses can be forecast with increasing accuracy, their apparent randomness diminishes. What once felt like sudden cosmic disruption becomes an expected event within a known cycle. This does not remove their emotional impact entirely, but it transforms it. Anticipation replaces shock, observation replaces fear. The sky becomes less unpredictable, even if it remains deeply impressive. This gradual shift lays the foundation for later scientific developments, where celestial phenomena are increasingly understood in terms of geometry, motion, and physical law rather than intention or omen. Yet even as this intellectual transformation unfolds, traces of earlier interpretations persist. Cultural memory continues to carry symbolic associations, and eclipses remain powerful moments of collective attention. In this transitional era, eclipses function as both endpoint and beginning. They mark the culmination of ancient interpretive systems and the early formation of systematic astronomical thought. They belong simultaneously to myth and to emerging science, reflecting the complexity of human attempts to understand a sky that is both visually dramatic and mathematically consistent. What emerges is not a replacement of one worldview by another, but a long and uneven layering of perspectives. The eclipse becomes a shared object of study and meaning, shaped by centuries of observation, interpretation, and refinement. And within this layered understanding, humanity takes its first sustained steps toward a worldview in which the sky is not only meaningful, but also intelligible. Even as prediction grows more precise and astronomical understanding becomes increasingly structured, eclipses never lose their emotional force. Across centuries and civilizations, they remain one of the few natural events that can still gather entire populations into shared attention, silence, and awe. The reason lies not only in their rarity, but in what they momentarily reveal: a familiar world briefly stripped of its most reliable constant. In the intellectual aftermath of developments in Mesopotamia, ancient China, and Mesoamerica, eclipses become increasingly integrated into scientific frameworks. They are calculated, anticipated, and mapped with growing accuracy. Yet even in these contexts of rising precision, their cultural resonance does not fade. Instead, it evolves. What was once feared as unpredictable darkness becomes an anticipated moment of cosmic alignment. But the emotional weight of witnessing it remains intact. This persistence reveals something fundamental about human perception. Knowledge does not erase experience. Even when an eclipse is fully understood in terms of celestial mechanics, the lived moment still disrupts ordinary perception. The gradual dimming of daylight, the cooling of air, the unnatural appearance of the sky, these sensations bypass abstraction. They are felt before they are interpreted. In many cultures, this dual awareness becomes a defining feature of eclipse experience. People know what is happening, yet still feel the instinctive response of uncertainty. The mind holds two truths at once. The sky is following a predictable pattern, and yet it appears momentarily wrong. This tension between understanding and perception is part of what keeps eclipses culturally significant, even in scientifically literate societies. Historically, eclipses also remain powerful in collective memory because they compress time. A long celestial cycle becomes visible in minutes. The moon's slow movement across the sun accelerates into perceptible transformation. This compression creates a sense of heightened reality, as if ordinary time has been temporarily suspended. Ancient observers, lacking modern frameworks of explanation, experienced this as a rupture in cosmic order. Even in later periods, when mechanisms are understood, the sensation of interruption persists. In societies shaped by earlier traditions from ancient Egypt, symbolic interpretations of celestial cycles continue to influence cultural imagination. The sun's daily passage, already embedded in narratives of renewal, makes eclipses feel like intensified moments within a broader rhythm of transformation. Even when not explicitly ritualized, the symbolic structure remains present, shaping how such events are perceived and remembered. What becomes increasingly clear is that eclipses occupy a unique psychological space. They are predictable yet dramatic, rare yet inevitable, natural yet historically charged. This combination ensures that they resist full normalization. Unlike many other astronomical phenomena that fade into background knowledge, eclipses continue to stand apart as events that demand attention, even when fully understood. Modern reflections on ancient eclipse interpretations often highlight the distance between myth and science. But this framing risks overlooking continuity. The human response to eclipses has always included both observation and meaning-making. What changes over time is not the presence of interpretation, but its structure. Where once interpretation was primarily mythological or ritual, it gradually incorporates measurement, calculation, and predictive reasoning. Yet the underlying impulse to make sense of sudden cosmic change remains consistent. Even today, Eclipses are accompanied by language that blends scientific explanation with emotional expression. They are described in terms of alignment and shadow, but also in terms of wonder, rarity, and significance. Public gatherings, media coverage, and shared observation events reflect a continuity with ancient communal responses, even if the explanatory frameworks have shifted dramatically. In this sense, eclipses function as a bridge across time. They connect ancient ritual spaces, early scientific inquiry, and modern observational culture through a shared human experience of celestial transformation. The same sun and moon that once inspired fear in early civilizations now inspire curiosity and scientific interest. But the moment of darkness remains fundamentally unchanged. The legacy of eclipses, therefore, is not only scientific or historical, it is experiential. It reveals how human beings respond to moments when the ordinary structure of the world briefly breaks down. And across thousands of years, that response continues to combine understanding with awe, knowledge with instinct, and clarity with a lingering sense of wonder. In the long sweep of history, eclipses endure as windows into both the sky and human culture. By examining the surviving records from Mesopotamian clay tablets to Maya codices, from Chinese imperial chronicles to Egyptian temple inscriptions, we gain insight not only into celestial mechanics, but into the human impulse to find meaning in sudden darkness. Eclipses, in this sense, are both events and mirrors. They reveal patterns in the heavens and patterns in human thought. For the early observers of Mesopotamia, each eclipse was a test of comprehension and authority. It demonstrated the power of priests and astronomers to predict and explain what was previously terrifying. It also reinforced the social hierarchy, linking celestial mastery to political legitimacy. Similarly, in ancient China, eclipses validated both the accuracy of the imperial court's astronomical records and the ethical alignment of rulers. The mandate of heaven found visual reinforcement in the darkening sky, and each calculated observation became an instrument of governance. In Mesoamerica, eclipses exemplified the delicate integration of science, ritual, and mythology. Calculated tables allowed priests to anticipate lunar and solar events, embedding precise knowledge within religious and ceremonial practice. The eclipse became a shared spectacle, a moment when political, spiritual, and astronomical authority converged. Even as prediction reduced the element of surprise, the dramatic visual experience ensured that the event retained its profound cultural resonance. Yet eclipses are not only markers of authority, they are also markers of memory. Across all these cultures, they punctuate historical narrative, providing reference points around which stories, laws, and genealogies can be organized. A solar or lunar eclipse becomes a temporal anchor, a moment when the ordinary flow of time is interrupted, recorded, and remembered. Scholars today still debate the extent to which these correlations reflect deliberate documentation, coincidence, or post-event interpretation, but the cumulative effect is clear. Eclipses leave an indelible imprint on both historical consciousness and cultural identity. Perhaps most striking is the continuity of human response. Across continents, epochs, and social structures, eclipses inspire a combination of fear, reverence, and attention that is remarkably consistent. While the interpretive frameworks differ, dragons, cosmic imbalance, divine warning, or symbolic cycles, the fundamental human reaction remains the same. Sudden darkness demands engagement. People observe, record, interpret, ritualize, and communicate, translating an ephemeral celestial moment into a lasting cultural and psychological legacy. This layered significance, scientific, symbolic, political, and emotional, ensures that eclipses are uniquely positioned in the human imagination. They are events that can be studied mathematically, framed morally, commemorated historically, and remembered artistically. Their impact extends beyond the immediate moment of darkness, influencing architecture, ritual practice, literature, and even the formation of calendars. In this way, eclipses function as both a natural phenomenon and a cultural catalyst, bridging the heavens and human society. As the centuries unfold, eclipses continue to remind us of the fragility of perception and the power of observation. They demonstrate that the sky is not simply a backdrop, but an active participant in human experience, capable of inspiring awe, fear, and reflection. Across civilizations separated by distance and time, eclipses generate a remarkably coherent pattern. They are anticipated yet astonishing, predictable yet extraordinary, natural yet profoundly human in their impact. In this enduring intersection of science, myth, and society, eclipses illuminate not only the mechanics of the cosmos, but the enduring human desire to understand, interpret, and find meaning in a universe that is vast, often unpredictable, and endlessly compelling. The shadowed sun and moon, fleeting though they are, have left a permanent mark on the trajectory of human thought, a testament to our unceasing engagement with the skies above. Long after the calculations are understood and the patterns of the sky are mapped with precision, the memory of eclipses continues to linger in human consciousness in a quieter, more reflective form. What once arrived as sudden terror in the middle of daylight has become a known feature of celestial motion. Yet the emotional echo of that first encounter with darkness never fully disappears. Even in the modern world, where predictions are exact and explanations are complete, the moment still carries a subtle pause in human attention, as if something ancient in perception briefly awakens again. Across the histories of Mesopotamia, ancient China, and Mesoamerica, eclipses once marked fear, authority, and transformation. They shaped calendars, justified rulers, guided rituals, and entered the deepest layers of myth and memory. Yet beneath all these interpretations, they were always the same simple alignment of sun, moon, and earth, a mechanical choreography unfolding far above human concerns, indifferent to meaning, yet endlessly inviting it. Over time, humanity learned to move between two ways of seeing. One sees the eclipse as geometry, predictable and precise, governed by orbital motion and gravitational structure. The other sees it as experience, a brief disruption of certainty, a reminder of how fragile perception becomes when the most reliable source of light disappears. Neither view replaces the other. They coexist, layered across centuries of thought, observation, and imagination. What remains most striking is not that eclipses were once feared, but that they were always shared, across continents that had no contact. People looked up at the same darkened sky and tried to understand it. They told different stories, performed different rituals, and built different systems of knowledge. Yet the underlying response was remarkably similar. Something in the sky changed, and humanity responded by searching for meaning. Even now, when an eclipse passes across the Earth, it still gathers attention in a way few other natural events can. Cities pause, crowds gather, instruments record, and for a brief moment, the familiar order of daylight gives way to something older and more uncertain. It is a reminder that beneath all layers of knowledge and civilization, there remains a shared human instinct to watch the sky and wonder. In the end, eclipses are not only about the mechanics of celestial bodies or the development of ancient astronomy. They're about the relationship between humans and the cosmos, an evolving dialogue between observation and interpretation, between certainty and surprise. They reveal how civilizations build meaning from moments of disruption, and how even the most predictable events can still carry emotional weight across time. And when the light returns, as it always does, the world looks unchanged. But those who have witnessed the darkness know that something subtle has shifted. Not in the sky, but in awareness itself, a brief reminder that the universe is vast, orderly, and yet still capable of moments that feel profoundly unfamiliar. In that fragile space between knowledge and wonder, eclipses continue to exist not as omens or mysteries anymore, but as echoes of an older human relationship with the sky, one that still quietly persists every time we look upward and notice how easily light can disappear,